Hey, this is DJ Mortal and welcome to Buildcrafting 102, which is all about armour. Now hopefully you've already watched Buildcrafting 101 where I talked about all the different stats and how they benefit your Guardian in game. If not, there is a link in the description. I strongly recommend you check it out as it will help a lot with the details we're going to talk about in this video. So in this video I'm going to be talking about all the different types of armour, exotic, legendary, etc. Where we're going to find high stat legendary armour, where we're going to find high stat exotic armour, where do you get the materials to upgrade that armour, stat distributions, artifice armour, masterworking armour costs, etc. Consider this your one-stop shop for everything armour related. And for those who make it to the end of the video, I have a super secret special treat for you. So you just hang on till the end and find out how to get some bonus points. So let's jump right in and understand the different types of armour that are in game. And there are 6 types, and those are common armour, which has a white background, uncommon, which has a green background, rare, which has a blue background, legendary, that's a purple background, and exotic with the wonderful gold background. Now the observant amongst you will have noticed that I only listed 5 types of armour there. The 6th is actually a slight variant of legendary armour called Artifice Armour, and I'll be talking more regarding Artifice in its own section later. Now common, uncommon and rare armours have no real bearing in the game anymore, as once you've completed the campaign they will no longer drop. This leaves us with only 2 types of armour to focus on, technically 3 if we count Artifice, but let's jump right into those 2. Legendary armour will make up the majority of the armour drops that you get, because as I previously mentioned, the lower level armour no longer will be given as a reward once you've completed the campaign. Legendary armour can drop with stat totals between 44 and 68, and the higher stats armour is dropped from higher tier activities. Exotic armour is the most powerful category in the game, and each piece has its own unique feature, be that an ability that buffs a certain type of grenade, or overall helps your stat distribution, or gives you a boost in damage when you meet certain criteria. Exotic armour can drop with stat totals between 48 and 70. Because of the powerful nature of these pieces of armour, you can only equip one at a time. Therefore, every build we craft will be focused on one particular piece of exotic armour, and you need to match your stats to best support that armour's unique ability. So let's focus on exotic armour. Now currently there are 120 pieces of individual exotic armour in the D2 universe. And obviously, if I were to go through the specifics of each individual one, we would be here for a very, very long time. So instead of talking about individual pieces of armour, we're going to group them into their base abilities. These groups will be Elemental, for armour pieces that help a subclass enhance its abilities, Neutral, which have no affinity to any particular subclass but boost overall stats, Specific, which utilise a certain subclass and ability type, and weapon enhancing exotics. When discussing these exotics, we're going to look at which element they are best suited to, any abilities that they are tied to, and any weapon type that they boost in any way. But before we go any further, please consider dropping a like and maybe even a subscribe. You really will be doing me a massive favour. So let's begin with neutral exotic armour for the hunter. Unless stated otherwise, all these armour pieces work with all elements. So the Aeon Swifts have no ties to any particular ability or weapon, giving an overall boost regardless. The Assassin's Cowl is tied to the melee ability. Bombardiers, you want to focus on class ability. Frosties have no affinity to abilities or weapon type. The Gemini Jester focuses on class ability. Knucklehead Radar is an overall exotic with no ties to ability or weapon. Radiant Dance Machines are tied to class. Stompies are tied to class. Star Eater Scales boost your super. The Sixth Coyote is tied to class, and the Wormhusk Crown is tied to class. The Hunter only has 2 elemental exotic armour pieces, the Graviton Forfeit and Gryfalcon's Hauberk, both of which are tied to the Void element, and the Gryfalcon's Hauberk is tied to a Void weapon. There are 19 pieces of exotic armour for the Hunter in the specific group. That means that each one of these pieces of armour is tied to a specific element's ability type. For example, Lucky Raspberry is tied to the Arc Bolt Grenade. So let's run through these. Athresis Embrace is tied to Solar Melee. Blight Ranger is Arc Super. Caliban's Hand is Solar Melee. Celestial Nighthawk, Solar Super. I can never pronounce this one, so apologies in advance. Krytaranchi's Facade is a Strand Grenade exotic. Gwynsin Vest, Void Super. Kepri's Sting, Void Melee. Liar's Handshake, Arc Melee. Lucky Raspberry, Arc Grenade. Mask of Bakris, Stasis Class Ability. Omnioculus, Void Melee. Aphelion Spath, Solar Melee. Orpheus Rig, Void Super. Radiant Flux, Arc Super. Raiju's Harness, also Arc Super. Renewal Grasps, Stasis Grenade. Shards of Galanor, Solar Super. Shinobu's Vow, Arc Grenade. Young Ahamkara's Spine, Solar Grenade. There are 8 weapon boosting exotics for the Hunter. The Foe Tracer, which has no ability affinity and boosts all weapons. Lucky Pants also has no ability affinity and boosts hand cannons. Mechanier's Trick Sleeves have no ability affinity and boost sidearms. Oath Keepers have no ability affinity and boost bows. Sealed Ahamkara's Grasps are tied to the melee ability and benefit all weapons. Speedloader's Slacks are tied to the class ability and boost all weapons. The Dragon's Shadow is also tied to the class ability and boosts all weapons, and the Triton Vice has no ability affinity and is tied to the Glaive. Moving on to Titans, we're going to begin again with neutral exotic armour. The AC D0 Feedback Fence is tied to the melee ability and has no weapon affinity. Aeon Safes have no ability or weapon affinity. The Antius Wards have no ability or weapon affinity either. The Arbor Warden is tied to the class ability. Armamentarium is tied to the grenade ability. Citan's Ramparts are tied to class ability. Crest of Alpha Lupi is tied to the super ability. Dune Marchers are tied to melee. Heart of Innermost Light, Lion Ramparts, Mask of the Quiet One, and One-Eyed Mask have not got any affinity with any particular ability or weapon. The Precious Scars have no ability affinity, but are tied to matched element weapons, i.e. if you are on a Void subclass, they are tied to Void weapons. Severance Enclosure is tied to the melee ability. Syntheseps are tied to the melee ability, and the Worm God Caress is also tied to the melee ability. The Titan has 4 elemental exotic armours. The Cadmus Ridge Lancecap is tied to the Stasis element, but has no ability or weapon affinity. Hallowfire Heart is tied to the Solar subclass. Lawless Splendour Helm is also tied to the Solar subclass, but has an affinity with class abilities. And the Phoenix Cradle is tied to the Solar element. Titan-specific exotics are the Aberrant Leap, which is tied to the Strand subclass class ability. An Insurmountable Skull Fort is tied to an Arc melee ability. The Ashen Wake is tied to a Solar Grenade ability. Curious of a Falling Star is tied to Arc super ability. Helm of Saint 14 is Void super ability. Hoarfrost Z is Stasis class ability. Kepri's Horn works with all elements, but is tied to a class ability and solar weapons. The M44 Standardsides works with multiple elements and is tied to the melee ability. Peregrine Greaves also works with multiple elements, unfortunately not all, and is tied to the melee ability. Point Contact Cannon Brace is Arc melee ability, Second Chance Void melee ability, and Ursa Furiosa Void super ability. Titan weapon boosting exotics are the Axiom War Rig that works with all elements, isn't tied to an ability, but benefits auto rifles and light machine guns. The Doomfang Palindrome is tied to the Void subclass and benefits all Void weapons. Eternal Warrior is tied to the Arc subclass and benefits all Arc weapons. Icefall Mantle is tied to the Stasis subclass and benefits all Stasis weapons. No Backup Plans is tied to the Void subclass and benefits shotguns. Peacekeepers works with all elements and is tied to SMGs. Stronghold works with all elements and is tied to swords, and the Path of Burning Steps is tied to the Solar subclass and benefits solar weapons. Now finally let's look at the Warlock exotic armour, again beginning with the neutral group. Aeon Souls have no ability or weapon affinity. Apotheosis Veil is tied to the super ability. Boots of the Assembler tied to class ability. Claws of Ahamkara melee ability. Eye of Another World has no particular affinity to any ability or weapon. Felwinter's Helm is melee ability. Karnstein Armlets melee ability. Lunafaction Boots are tied to class ability, though also benefit on the Well of Radiance. Necrotic Grips are tied to melee ability and are benefited by Weapons of Sorrow. Nezarak's Sin has no ability affinity, but is tied to Void weapons. Sanguine Alchemy is tied to class ability and matched elemental weapons, i.e. weapons matching your subclass. The Stag is tied to class ability. Transversive Steps have no affinity to ability or weapons. Verity's Brow is tied to the grenade ability and matched elemental weapons, and the Winter's Guile is tied to melee abilities. Warlock elemental exotic armours. Crown of Tempest is tied to the Arc element. Fallen Sunstar is also tied to the Arc element. Swarmers are tied to Strand, and the Wings of Sacred Dawn is tied to the Solar subclass and benefits solar weapons. Warlock specific group armour pieces are Astrocyte Verse, which is tied to Void Super, Balidor's Wrath Weavers tied to Stasis Super, Controverse Hold tied to Void Grenade, Dawn Chorus, Solar Super, Geomag Stabilizers, Arc Super, Getaway Artist, Arc Class, Nothing Manacles, Void Grenade, Osmiancy Gloves, Stasis Grenade, Phoenix Protocol, Solar Super, Skull of Dire Ahamkara, Void Super, Starfire Protocol, Solar Grenade, Stormdancer's Brace, Arc Super, Sunbracers, Solar Grenade, and Vesper of Radius, tied to Arc class abilities. And last but by no means least, Warlock weapon boosting exotic armours are the Cenotaph Mask, which works with all elements and boosts trace rifles. Chromatic Fire works with all elements and boosts kinetic weapons. Mantle of Battle Harmony is tied to an ability super and matched elemental weapons. Ophidian Aspect is tied to all subclasses and boosts all weapons. And Rain of Fire is tied to the Solar subclass and boosts fusion and linear fusions. Have you had a chance to press that like and subscribe yet? Go on, you know you want to push that button. All armour drops with a randomised total stats range, dependent on the type of armour it is. As mentioned earlier, legendary armour ranges from 44 total stats to 68, and exotic armour ranges from 48 to 70. Although the total stats are random, they do follow some rules, i.e. how they're distributed amongst the abilities on your piece of armour. Understanding these rules allows us to target specific attributes within an armour piece. First of all, the game will divide the total stats approximately in half and place them into one of two stat pools. The best way to imagine these stat pools is looking at any piece of armour, draw a line between the recovery and discipline stats, like so. The 3 stats above the line are stat pool 1 and the 3 below stat pool 2. If we look at the stats in each pool, you'll notice that they are equal, i.e. pool 1 in this example, it has 6 mobility, 12 resilience and 16 recovery, giving a total of 34. And discipline of 20, intellect 2 and strength 12 in pool 2 also equals 34. Now, there will be occasional discrepancies with these, though I've never seen it be more than 2. The most you can get in any one stat on a single piece of armour is 30, and the minimum is 2. However, the total stats for each stat pool will never exceed 34 at base. This means in theory it is possible to get a 68 rolled piece of armour with 2 spikes of 30, one in pool 1 and one in pool 2. However, this is very, very rare, and I've never actually achieved this, though I have come close with this piece. But please note that I have masterworked this piece of armour, hence the reason it's showing 79. Its actual base stats are 67. So by now you've no doubt worked out that we need to focus our armour towards the stats that we are requiring for the build we are putting together. As a very quick example, if I was going to make a PvE build for my Warlock using the Getaway Artist exotic, I would probably be focusing on resilience, recovery and discipline. But how am I expecting to get armour, specifically with stat spikes, in those areas? Well, this is where Bungie has come to the rescue, and they've done so in the form of the Ghost Armourer perks that force armour to drop with certain stat biases, meaning that armour will drop with a minimum of 10 stat points in the area that you have chosen, and they're far more likely to drop with higher stats in those areas. So for my Getaway Artist example, I would select a Discipline Armourer mod. Why Discipline? Well, think back to the rules we spoke about earlier. We know that the total stats for the armour piece are going to be divided equally between stat pool 1 and stat pool 2. With the Armourer mod, we know that the particular stat that I'm targeting will have a minimum of 10 and will probably be significantly higher, meaning there's a high probability that my chosen focus will be greater than 50% of the stats available in that particular stat pool, i.e. whichever armourer mod I choose is a very high chance that that will be a single spike within its perk pool. So the obvious question then becomes, well, if I'm targeting recovery, resilience and discipline, why would you pick the Discipline Armourer mod? And the answer is simply down to basic probability. If I know I'm going to have a spike in one area within one pool, then I want to focus on the pool in which I only want one of the 3 actual stats. This means I'm guaranteed to have the perk I want in that particular stat pool, and I have a 2 in 3 chance of getting the stats I want in this other perk pool. Please be aware that the Ghost Armourer mod does have a limitation with regards to activities that drop specifically focused pieces of equipment. For example, if you are doing an activity that will drop a mobility focused piece of armour, Using a Ghost Armourer mod on mobility will have no effect whatsoever, so in that case you would be better placing your Armourer mod to focus on your secondary preference. This is also true for certain exotic armour types, but I'll detail that in the next section. The game considers high stat armour to be any piece that has a total base stat in excess of 60. So that makes it approximately the top 10% of potential drops. Fortunately, there are various activities that guarantee high stat armour drops. Unfortunately, most of these are high-end game content. Let's start with the easier options for farming the high stat armour. The war table in the helm allows you to focus defiant engrams, which are picked up just by playing strikes, crucible, gambit, etc. Don't ever waste your time focusing a class item, as these have zero stats at all until Masterworked, so it's just a waste of your engrams. As you can see, every armour piece I've just focused is in excess of 60 total stat points. Staying in the helm, the sonar station allows the focus decryption of deep engrams. Now obviously these are seasonal, and I'm sure you will have plenty of these stored up. If not, just go play salvage or deep dives and you will acquire plenty of them. Moving on, the weekly story missions have an escalating chance to drop high stat armour as you move up through the difficulty settings. Platinum tier rewards giving the best chance of all. This applies to both Lightfall and Witch Queen weekly story missions. High stat armour drops are also common in Master Wellspring, though you will need a fire team for this one. A weekly visit to Xur is recommended, as he has a great source of both exotic and legendary armour. However, the stat totals do go up and down week by week, so while one week he may have some excellent gear, the next he may have complete dross. Empire hunts on Europa have an escalating chance to drop high stat armour as you increase in the difficulty level. Trials of Osiris can drop high stat armour from going flawless, turning in engrams, and focusing trials engrams. You also can, though very rarely, get high stat drops as part of your end game loot. All raids have a chance to drop high stat armour from every encounter and chest, though master raids, that would be the current Root of Nightmares as of Season 21, and the Rotator, have a specific stat bias that changes each week, so it's always worth checking out what is happening each week. Remember that this stat bias will overrule your Ghost Armourer mod if they are aligned. Therefore, change your Ghost Armourer mod to your secondary preference if the bias is towards your primary stat this week. Grandmaster Nightfalls are an excellent source of high stat exotic armour, and for upgrade materials for masterworking armour such as Ascendant Shards and Prisms. However, high tier content will require a fire team. So moving from one of the most intense activities in game to one of the most calming, fishing, would you believe, can drop high stat armour, both legendary and exotic. I was quite surprised too. Also, when turning in an exotic fish, you have a very high chance of being given an Ascendant Shard. I was quite surprised by this myself. Staying briefly with solo activities, the Legendary and Master Lost sectors can drop high stat exotic armour. It is on a rotation daily, so keep checking back until it is what you need. Your seasonal pass holds a full set of high stat armour for all three characters, though the level does vary season on season. It also holds an average of 6 enhancement prisms and 3 ascendant shards. At Rahul, you can focus exotic engrams into high stat exotic gear. Advanced decryption will cost you an exotic engram, 30,000 glimmer and 1 ascendant shard, and targeted decryption will cost you 60,000 glimmer, 3 Ascendant Shards and 1 Exotic Cipher. He also offers material exchanges. For upgrading materials, Enhancement Prisms will cost you 10 Enhancement Cores and 10,000 Glimmer, and an Ascendant Shard will cost you 10 Enhancement Prisms and 50,000 Glimmer. Now let's move on to dungeons. Be aware that dungeon drops are not guaranteed to be high stat, even on Master, with the exception of the Zulmak boss fight on Pit of Heresy, which is guaranteed to have 16 in 2 different stats, so use your Ghost to focus one of those exactly where you want it. However, all Master dungeons do have guaranteed Artifice Armour drops, and these are the only place in-game that you can acquire Artifice Armour. Artifice Armour is simply legendary armour with an extra socket that can be used to equip mods that allow you to gain slight benefits in your stats. These can be controlled by yourself and give +3 in any stat you choose. Whilst +3 doesn't seem like very much, if you have 5 pieces on, that is 15 stats that are completely targetable, i.e. 1.5 stat tiers that you control. All armour in the game can be upgraded and masterworked. This is a key step in preparing to make your build. There are 2 key benefits to masterworking your gear. First is an increase in stats mod positions, and the second is at level 10 or masterwork, every stat on your piece of armour will gain +2, meaning a base stat of 68 will become an 80. As your armour moves up through the levels, the cost to improve by 1 level increases, and exotic armour is the most expensive to upgrade. Not all armour drops at level 1, some do drop at up to level 5. However, the cost to move from one level to the next is shown in the table here. The total cost to bring a piece of legendary armour from 0 to masterwork is 16,000 Glimmer, 25 legendary shards, 3 enhancement cores, 3 enhancement prisms and 1 ascendant shard. As previously mentioned, upgrading exotic armour costs significantly more than its legendary counterparts, the full details shown in the table here. However, the total cost for bringing a piece of exotic from level 1 to level 10 is 24,000 Glimmer, 30 legendary shards, 5 enhancement cores, 5 enhancement prisms and 3 ascendant shards. Now, way back at the start I promised you a super secret bonus point. If you apply the Solstice Rekindled armour mod as an ornament to your chest, you will gain 1 bonus resilience. No one knows why, but it works, and it can be the difference between 9 wasted stats and an extra tier in your mods. Okay, we've finally made it to the end, which means it's time for a quick recap. With types of armour, there are 6 types in-game. However, only legendary, artifice and exotic armour matter after the campaign, and exotic armour has unique perks. Exotics can be grouped into one of 4 categories, those being elemental, that benefit your subclass, neutral, that benefit regardless of subclass or ability, specific, that are targeted to a specific element and ability, and weapon boosting exotics. A high-level overview of all exotics was provided in the exotic armour sections earlier in the video. Check out the timestamps in the description. With armour stat distribution, stats are divided equally between the 2 stat pools. There is a maximum of 34 points per pool, and a maximum of 30, a minimum of 2 per individual stat. Armour stat targeting. Ghost Armourer mods guarantee a minimum of 10 points in a selected stat and give a good chance of being much higher. Target stats in a pool alone for the best probability of success, i.e. if you are looking for mobility, resilience and strength, target strength as that is in the second pool on its own. Be aware that Ghost Armourer mods do not give any additional benefit over stat-biased armour drops, e.g. Master Raids and Exotic drops. What this means is if, for example, you were targeting a set of Star Eater scales from Rahul, if you have an intellect armourer mod on your ghost, you will not actually get any benefit, as the Star Eater scale has an intrinsic stat bias towards intellect. Farming high stat armour. High stat armour is any piece over 60 base stats. Sources are Empire Hunts, Fishing, Grandmasters, Rahul, Raids, Seasonal Vendors, Seasonal Pass, Soloing Daily Lost Sectors, Trials of Osiris, Weekly Story Missions, Master Wellspring and Xur. Upgrading armour. This increases the available mod slots on your armour piece. Masterworking grants +2 to all stats, and the cost increases with each level. Exotic armour costing significantly more resources than legendary armour. So that's the end of the video, and you thought that armour was easy. Once again, if you'd be kind enough to drop a like and maybe even a subscribe, you would be doing me a huge favour as I'm trying to get this channel to grow. But whatever you're doing today, I hope you have a fantastic time.